Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he investigates a most peculiar discovery. A silver comb left behind at a crime scene, with a single hair caught between its teeth. Stay with me till the end, because that one strand may reveal not just the killer's identity, but the secret they killed to protect. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second. Until the very end. Chapter 1. The comb with a single hair. Fog clung low over the Wiltshire Downs, draping the countryside in a gauze of hushed expectancy. From a distance, Ravenscroft Manor appeared not so much built as exhaled by the mist itself, its gables brooding, its stone veranda blurred at the edges like a half-forgotten painting. Morning had arrived late, reluctant to intrude upon the silence, but inside, the quiet had already been broken. Mrs. Althea Marsh, housekeeper of 27 years and proud gatekeeper of Ravenscroft's order, had not screamed when she found the body. She had simply stared at it stiff, cold, far too still, then turned and walked, exactly 5 paces, to the wall telephone. Her voice when she spoke to the constable was not frantic but clipped. "It is Miss Fenella, in the music room. I believe she is dead. By the time the local doctor confirmed it, strangled. Likely with something fine, something deliberate." The house had begun to fill with tension, like steam rising under a locked lid. Fenella Marsh, the adopted daughter of the late Lord Ambrose Ravenscroft, had always seemed miscast amid the manor's heavy portraits and darker ambitions. With her city accent and strange sense of humor, she disrupted the old corridors like jazz beneath a cathedral dome. But she was clever, wickedly clever, and now she was dead. The guests gathered awkwardly in the drawing room, like pawns awaiting orders. There was Henry Ravenscroft, the prodigal cousin returned from Argentina, who'd made his fortune exporting saffron, though no one quite knew how. There was Cecilia Ambrose, Ambrose's sister-in-law, brittle and beautiful, ever in mourning for something or someone. And then there was Rupert Vale, Fenella's violin instructor, whose eyes lingered on her too long in life and now, in death, avoided her altogether. "Who would do such a thing?" murmured Cecilia, her fingers worrying the edge of her lace cuff. "She was light-hearted," said Rupert Vale, a bit strange, but never cruel. Henry sniffed. "People don't get strangled for being strange." And no one in this house had a reason to hate her. That, as it turned out, was not true. The comb was found after the constable had finished dusting for fingerprints. It had slid beneath the settee in the music room, its tortoiseshell teeth chipped, and in it a single strand of silver blonde hair, unmistakably not Fenella's. She had dark curls. The strand shimmered like antique silk. When the local authorities concluded that Fenella's death had been a crime of passion, likely an outsider, a burglar perhaps, the household relaxed, visibly so. Only Mrs. Marsh had doubts. "A burglar does not tidy the tea tray," she said, eyes narrowing, "nor polish the music stand, nor slip a comb under the furniture." 2 days later, she wrote a letter. The address was crisp, foreign, Belgian. 3 mornings after that, a cab rolled up to the long gravel drive of Ravenscroft Manor. A man stepped out, small, neat, and immaculate in his dark overcoat and pale gloves. He tapped the front door with the tip of his cane and gave a little bow to no one in particular. "Hercule Poirot," he announced. "I believe someone in this house has lied to the police, and I do not like lies." From an upstairs window, someone watched him enter, then turned quietly away. Chapter 2. The first-class music room was as it had been left, silent, dustless, yet somehow disturbed. Hercule Poirot stood just inside the doorway, arms folded behind his back, eyes scanning not for the obvious but for the subtle tremors left by guilt. The room did not weep. It held its breath. Mrs. Marsh stood beside him, her spine stiff with habitual order, yet her eyes betraying a flicker of suppressed unease. "It was here, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. Miss Fenella was lying just there between the cello and the rug. She had not even knocked over the music stand. Poirot's gaze landed on the polished stand, the blank sheet resting upon it. "No struggle," he murmured. "A quiet death. That, madam, is most deliberate." He approached the rug, stooping low, adjusting his cuff fastidiously before reaching for a hairbrush near the edge of the piano. "The comb," he said. "You mentioned it?" Mrs. Marsh nodded. "Under the settee, sir. I wrapped it in linen myself. The constable said it proved nothing. Au contraire. A comb is most intimate, a personal object. It chooses its owner with more precision than a hat. May I see it?" She withdrew it from her apron pocket with care. The comb glinted under the window light, its teeth uneven, and still there caught near the hinge a pale silver strand. Poirot turned it slowly, then stopped. "One tooth is broken. See a recent fracture. This comb was removed from someone's hair with haste, or violence, not Miss Fenella's," she asked, already knowing. He shook his head gently. "Mademoiselle Fenella's hair, I am told, was dark and tightly curled. This," he pinched the strand and held it to the window. "Silken, silver, straight." Mrs. Marsh looked at him, her mouth thin. "I knew it. Someone from within, not without." Poirot gave a modest shrug. "Let us not leap to conclusions, madam. But yes, already, I suspect the murder was not the work of a stranger." They moved to the tea tray. A pot, half full. 3 cups to with lipstick marks, 1 without. A scone, untouched. A napkin folded in such a meticulous triangle that Poirot paused over it longer than most men might. "Tea," he said softly. "Always tea, and always careless habits around it. But this is not careless. You think she had a guest?" Mrs. Marsh asked. Poirot looked at her gravely. "She had 3. 1 poured, 1 stirred. 1 folded a napkin in a manner that suggests either obsessive precision or a need to delay." He picked up a teaspoon. A grain of undissolved sugar clung to its stem. "Someone left in haste, but not before pretending not to," Poirot mused. "You see, madam, even a murderer takes the time to appear unhurried. That is how one survives among polite society." As they stepped back into the hall, Poirot paused by the edge of the grand staircase. The thick red carpet ran down in precise symmetry, but a single imprint, the faintest scuff near the 5th step, caught his eye. He bent, frowned, and muttered, "A woman's heel, but not recent, perhaps." The moment before, Miss Fenella came down alone that morning. Mrs. Marsh offered. The rest were already in the garden room. Poirot made a small noise in his throat. And yet, someone followed her. Briefly, perhaps to ensure she remained alone. From the far end of the corridor, the soft tap of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Henry Ravenscroft emerged from the billiard room, his scarf knotted too carefully, his expression artfully composed. "You must be the famous detective," he said with dry amusement. "We've heard tales, of course. The Frenchman with the mustache." "I am Belgian," Poirot said evenly. "And tales, monsieur, are often the refuge of those who wish to forget the truth." Henry smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. As he passed, Poirot glanced down. On his collar, just at the edge, no more than a whisper of silver, clung a single thread of hair. Poirot made no remark. He simply watched the man vanish around the corner and murmured to no one in particular, "Ah, but it is always the smallest things, n'est-ce pas?" Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The time luncheon was served, a quiet affair marked more by glances than conversation. The inhabitants of Ravenscroft Manor had already begun to orbit one another like wary satellites. Poirot, seated with careful neutrality at the middle of the long dining table, took note of every fork lifted too slowly, every mouthful chewed without appetite, every gaze that hovered a second too long. I do hope you're not expecting us to eat under suspicion," murmured Cecilia Ambrose from across the table, her voice lacquered with disdain. She wore black, not mourning, but something deeper, as if she had made an aesthetic of grief. "Madam," said Poirot, laying down his napkin with elegant precision, "I expect you only to eat as yourselves. The truth, it rarely hides behind silence. It hides behind performance." Henry Ravencroft chuckled dryly. "Well, this ought to be a most theatrical week, then." Beside him sat Rupert Vale, pale and thin, fingers twitching restlessly near the base of his glass. "Are we to be interrogated over pudding?" he asked, the tremor in his voice attempting to masquerade his wit. Poirot merely smiled. After the meal, at the urging of Mrs. Marsh, the house's principal occupants were asked to assemble in the library for a brief discussion. Poirot entered last, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The room was rich with dark wood and dense volumes and old study that seemed to trap secrets within its walls. He took a moment before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the intrusion. I have been invited by Mrs. Marsh to examine the unfortunate death of Miss Fenella Marsh. Your cooperation, naturellement, will ensure that justice is done, swiftly and without unnecessary discomfort." Rupert Vale laughed once too sharply. "You assume one of us is guilty, then?" Poirot's eyes flicked to him. "I assume, monsieur, only that the murderer is not in a hurry to be caught." Cecilia crossed her legs, her cigarette burning languidly in one hand. "Fenella wasn't a particularly lovable creature," she said coolly. "She pried, asked questions, read things not meant for her." "Ah," said Poirot. "And what things were those?" "She never told me," Cecilia replied, exhaling a slow, pointed stream of smoke. "But she liked to imply." Poirot turned his attention next to Henry. "Monsieur Ravencroft, you were abroad until recently, yes?" "Correct. Buenos Aires. I arrived 3 days before Fenella's incident." He lifted his eyes, steady and unreadable. "We weren't close, and yet you dined together, played billiards, walked the grounds." Henry's mouth thinned. "She was family, adopted," murmured Cecilia, not looking up from her cigarette. "A child brought in when Lord Ravencroft lost his wife," Poirot said softly. "A gesture of generosity?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that always feels like someone holding their breath. "She didn't inherit anything, if that's what you're implying," said Henry sharply. "The estate is entailed." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet she remained here, with influence, with questions, in the far corner, silent until now," said a young woman barely past 20, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Isabel Marsh, Fenella's younger cousin, quiet, often overlooked. Poirot addressed her gently. "Mademoiselle, you were closest to Miss Fenella, were you not?" She nodded hesitantly. She helped me with my French, with reading. Sometimes she said things that confused me, but I think she meant to protect me." "From what?" Poirot asked. Isabel hesitated. Then, almost in a whisper, "From secrets. From grown-up things I wasn't supposed to know." Poirot inclined his head. "A house like Ravencroft," he said, surveying the room, "does not kill by accident. Someone in this very room had something to lose, or something to hide." The air thickened, and when one conceals a truth so fiercely, Poirot continued, "it is not always the large lies that give them away, but the very small ones. The way you stir your tea, the shoes you do not wear, the way you glance, half a second too late." He paused at the threshold of the door, then turned. "I will ask to speak to each of you in turn, but in the meantime, I suggest you look at one another more carefully. You may find that your enemy wears a familiar face." And with that, Hercule Poirot departed, leaving behind a room where silence now meant far more than peace. Chapter 4. Poirot arrived next morning, dawn pale and bruised, as if the sky itself had been kept awake by secrets. Ravencroft Manor, with its narrow windows and brooding chimneys, seemed to withdraw further into its own shadow. Within its stone bones, the guests moved carefully to careful. Poirot thought as if the Carters were listening. He stood alone in the drawing room, surveying the space with the calm exactitude of a surgeon before an operation. The carpet was freshly brushed. The chairs had been subtly rearranged. Even the portraits on the walls seemed to have shifted slightly, as if in silent preparation for what was to come. Mrs. Marsh entered briskly with a clipboard in hand. "Each of them has agreed to meet with you, Monsieur Poirot, in the blue parlor. I've scheduled the first at 10, Trisbeen," said Poirot. "And the constable, gone back to the village. He believes it was an opportunistic thief. Silly, really." Poirot smiled faintly. "When a comb breaks, madam, and finds itself beneath the settee, it is not the hand of an opportunist that placed it there. It is the hand of a planner, a tidy one." He walked to the window and peered out toward the lawn. Cecilia Ambrose was walking her Afghan hound in elegant loops, its silky coat flaring in the wind. Behind her, Isabel trailed at a distance, stopping now and then to pick at the bark of a birch tree. Poirot turned away. "Tell me, Mrs. Marsh, was Miss Fenella in possession of anything, how shall I say, dangerous? Letters, diaries, knowledge?" Mrs. Marsh pursed her lips. "She kept notebooks, small ones, with tabs, but she never let anyone see what was inside." "Where are they now?" "Gone. I looked yesterday. Her drawers were empty, except for a receipt for a parcel she'd posted to London last Thursday." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did she say to whom it was addressed?" "She only said it was for protection, whatever that meant." Poirot nodded slowly. "It means, madam, that she feared something very much indeed. At 10 precisely." Cecilia Ambrose entered the blue parlor, cigarette case in hand. She lowered herself into the armchair opposite Poirot as if it were a throne. "You do enjoy stirring a hornet's nest, don't you?" she said. "Madam, the hornets were already agitated. I merely made them visible." She lit her cigarette. "I knew Fenella from the beginning, you understand. She was sharp, too sharp, always watching. She thought knowledge made her powerful." Poirot leaned forward, fingertips touching. "Did it?" "Clearly not," Cecilia replied, blowing out smoke. "Unless you consider murder a form of validation." Poirot said nothing. Instead, he observed her face to composed. He saw the set of her jaw, the faint twitch at the corner of her right eye, the way she crossed her legs and uncrossed them a second too quickly. "You disliked her." Poirot said finally. "I didn't trust her." "That's different. And she you?" Cecilia smiled grimly. "She once told me my pearls were paste." I laughed. "But she was right." She stood. "You'll find we all had reasons to dislike her, monsieur. But motive isn't proof." As the door closed behind her, Poirot jotted a note in his book. "Cecilia, afraid of exposure, knows more than she reveals." The second to enter was Rupert Vale. He said awkwardly, back stiff, hands in his lap, "I didn't kill her," he said before Poirot could even open his mouth. "Why would you feel the need to say that so quickly?" Poirot asked, tilting his head. "Because everyone's looking at me like I did. You were close to her." Rupert nodded. "We played music together. She was gifted. Gifted how? In noticing things. She could tell when a player was lying through a phrase. Music, it doesn't lie easily." Poirot smiled faintly. "But people do." Rupert hesitated. "She knew someone had a secret. She said she'd confront them before the weekend. That's why she died, isn't it?" Poirot stood, gently smoothing the front of his waistcoat. "Mademoiselle Fenella uncovered something, yes, and the murderer, desperate to protect it, resorted to the most final method." Rupert's voice cracked slightly. "I wish she'd told me." Poirot didn't respond. He was already thinking of the comb, of the hair, of the tea tray and the vanished notebooks, pieces in a puzzle that only appeared calm until you twisted it slightly, and the truth bled through the cracks. Outside, The wind stirred the ivy across the window. Inside, Poirot adjusted a paperweight on the desk a quarter-inch to the left, then stepped away. "Now," he murmured, "let us begin to see who arranged the scene so artfully." Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Third to enter the blue parlor was Henry Ravencroft. The scent of expensive cologne preceded him, faintly floral, to cultivated for a country estate. He carried a whiskey glass, though it was scarcely noon, and looked at Poirot with the slow, assessing calm of a man accustomed to measuring risk. "I'm told you're the best," he said, lowering himself into the armchair and setting the glass beside him without drinking. "I am precise, monsieur," Poirot replied mildly. "Often, that is enough." Henry stretched his long legs out, ankle over knee. "I'd rather not waste your time or mine." "I didn't kill Fenella." Poirot smiled slightly. "Very few people ever begin an interview by declaring their innocence. But let us presume you are telling the truth. Then perhaps you can assist me." "In what way?" "In understanding her." "What did she want from you?" Henry's brow furrowed. "She asked too many questions. Kept probing about the estate's finances. Wanted to know how my business was doing in Argentina. Said she was curious about what the family had invested in. Had she any right to ask such things? She had nerve." "That's different." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "And did you answer her questions?" "I dismissed them." A pause. "She didn't like that, and yet she did not stop." "No." Henry looked away. "She had a way of smiling when she was testing you, like a cat that's seen the mouse twitch." Poirot rose and adjusted the curtains slightly to let in the gray light. "Did she threaten you?" Henry's jaw tensed. "Not directly, but she implied that if she found anything untoward, she would see it brought to light." Poirot's head tilted. "Even if it meant harming the family name?" "She wasn't sentimental about that sort of thing." When Henry left, Poirot made another notation in his small leather-bound book. Henry concerned with perception. Implied threat from Fenella. Possible financial motive. The door opened again. Isabel Marsh stepped in hesitantly, as though she feared leaving a trace. Her dress was too thin for the season, and she clasped a book to her chest like a shield. "You needn't be afraid, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, gesturing toward the armchair. "I only ask that you speak with honesty." She nodded, sitting as though afraid the chair might reject her. "I miss her," she said softly. "Even when she was difficult, she made me feel like I wasn't invisible." Poirot offered a kind smile. "She looked after you?" "She told me which people not to trust. Said they smiled too much when they lied." "And did she ever say who?" Isabel hesitated. "No names, but she once told me to never be alone with the person who leaves their door unlocked." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "And whose door is always unlocked?" "I don't know. I've never tested it." "Perhaps you should not," Poirot said softly. "Tell me, what did she confide in you in her final days?" Isabel clutched her book tighter. "She said she had a plan, that the truth would come out soon." She seemed scared, but also proud, as if she'd finally seen the full picture. Poirot leaned back, fingertips pressed together. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You are more observant than you believe." When she left, Poirot stood still for some time, watching the dust swirl in the column of light that spilled through the window. Already, there were cracks forming in the façade, a warning not to trust the one with the open door, a receipt for a parcel sent in haste, a pattern of questions that made people afraid, and a comb forgotten, or perhaps planted, holding a single thread of someone else's hair. Poirot folded his notebook, eyes glinting. "The lies," he whispered to himself, "are becoming untidy." Chapter 6. The first false letter was just after tea when the first illusion of certainty arrived, and with it, the weight of a convenient answer. Inspector Larch, summoned again from the nearby village, returned with the air of a man proud to have tied a bow on a package Poirot had only begun to unwrap. She was blackmailing him, the inspector said confidently. dropping a file onto the polished desk of the blue parlor. Rupert Vale, the violinist. It's all here. Poirot, who had been carefully arranging the sugar cubes on his saucer, did not look up. Indeed, mon ami? And what, may I ask, is all? Larch opened the file with a little theatrical flourish. A letter unsigned, but found in Miss Fenella's drawer tucked inside her copy of Anna Karenina. It reads like a demand for payment. Strong implications. She knew about something scandalous in Rupert's past. Something he'd pay to keep buried. Poirot raised a single eyebrow. And Rupert? Stammered like a drunk child when I confronted him. Didn't deny it outright. And get this, he withdrew a large sum of cash from the village bank 3 days before the murder. Poirot reached for the letter, eyes scanning it quickly. The handwriting was precise, looped, yet oddly restrained. And you are certain she wrote this? Larch gave a smug nod. It was in her room, wasn't it? Poirot stood and moved toward the window, the letter still in hand. Yes, but that is not the same thing as saying she wrote it. She had motive, Larch pressed. He had opportunity. And a reason to panic. Poirot did not answer immediately. He was watching the reflection of the drawing room in the glass. How Cecilia stood just beyond the doorway, pretending not to eavesdrop, her cigarette burning low. At last, Poirot turned. Tell me, Inspector, how many people in this house knew where Miss Fenella kept her books? Well, anyone could have looked, I suppose. And do you believe our clever Mademoiselle Fenella would hide a damning letter in a book, whose spine was creased and obvious? She was young, careless. Poirot shook his head gently. No, mon ami. She was young, yes, but careless? Never. The door creaked slightly, and Cecilia entered with the exaggerated grace of someone who did not wish to seem, as though they had been listening. I hear there's been a development, she said, her tone airy. Perhaps, Poirot said mildly. Tell me, madam, have you ever seen Miss Fenella write? Her script. Frequently, she replied. She kept a journal in the mornings, neat, sharp, left-leaning. Poirot held up the letter. And this? Cecilia leaned forward. A pause. No, she said slowly. Not her hand. This one is upright, conservative. She curled her ears. These are straight. Poirot turned to Larch. You see, it is a forgery, planted to mislead. The withdrawal of money, yes, that is interesting, but not conclusive. Perhaps Monsieur Vale was being blackmailed, but not by the victim. Larch frowned. So we're back to nothing? No, Inspector. We are back to the truth, which is often far less convenient than a tidy theory. Poirot returned to the desk, where a small envelope lay sealed. The postmark was Ravencroft, the address written in dark ink. Sister Agatha, Chelsea Convent, London. He tapped it thoughtfully. She was trying to send something away, to a person she trusted. A sister, a sanctuary. Someone who kept secrets not for gain, but for grace. He looked up. And now that parcel has vanished, but its absence may tell us as much as its contents. Cecilia stood very still. You're saying someone here stole it? I am saying someone knew she was trying to protect something, and they stopped her. Poirot turned to Larch with a faint smile. Continue to follow Rupert, if you wish, but do not be too eager, mon ami. False guilt is the shadow behind which the real criminal often hides, and with that, he stepped past them both, already thinking of silver hair, open doors, and the peculiar symmetry of lies. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut next morning unfolded with a deceptive calm. The manor seemed to exhale, windows cracked open to the garden's damp breath, cups of tea taken in silence, firewood stacked neatly beside unused hearths. And yet, Poirot felt it immediately. Something had shifted. He stood at the base of the staircase, watching the household stir to life, each figure playing their morning role with just a touch too much deliberation. Aware now of being watched, they walked straighter, smiled more cautiously, left fewer footprints on the rugs. It was, to Poirot's mind, the perfect moment to apply pressure. By 10 o'clock, he had summoned each of them one by one back to the blue parlor, not for formal interviews, but for conversation, reflection, a gentle disturbance in their carefully rehearsed calm. Rupert Vale arrived first, jacket mismatched with his trousers, eyes red as if from poor sleep. He gripped a leather folder as if it were life-preserving. "I've brought you my letters," he said without being asked. "Every note I ever received from her. You'll see there's nothing threatening in them." Poirot took the folder but did not open it. "You are very concerned with what others think, monsieur." Rupert blinked. "Well, yes. I am under suspicion. But that is not quite what I meant. You are concerned with appearing innocent. That is different from being innocent, n'est-ce pas?" Rupert flushed. "I was only trying to help, and yet when confronted, you grew pale and stammered. Not because you are guilty, perhaps, but because you fear being thought so. Tell me, monsieur, what is it that you hide not from me but from yourself?" Rupert said nothing. His mouth opened slightly, then shut. Poirot did not press further. Next came Henry Ravenscroft, looking unbothered. He slouched into the same armchair and crossed his arms. "You've been speaking to everyone," he said. "Stirring pots. It is the task of the bee," Poirot said, smiling faintly. "To disturb pollen so that something may grow." Henry scoffed. "She was a meddler, that girl. Didn't know how to keep her head down. And what did she threaten to uncover in your dealings?" "Monsieur, you were not, I imagine, keen on her curiosity regarding the Ravenscroft estate. She had theories," Henry said, waving a hand, "about mismanaged funds, missing inventories, a purchase here or there made in someone else's name. All nonsense." Poirot's smile thinned. "Nonsense has a curious habit of becoming clarity when one is no longer alive to dispute it." Henry leaned forward, voice low. "Let's not pretend she was some saint. She enjoyed making people uncomfortable." Poirot murmured. "But the truth does make people uncomfortable, does it not?" Henry stood, irritated. "You won't find your answer in the past, Poirot. Whatever happened had happened here, recently." Poirot tilted his head. "I wonder, monsieur, if you truly believe that." After lunch, Cecilia made her appearance, trailing a scent of orange blossom and cold smoke. She did not sit, but wandered the room, brushing her fingers across the bookshelves. "You've made quite a theater of things," she said. "It is not I who created the stage." Poirot replied, "Merely the one who studies its script." She turned, eyes half-lidded. "You suspect Henry, don't you?" "I suspect everyone, but him particularly." "Because of the hair?" Poirot said nothing, but she smiled anyway. "Of course I noticed. And of course I didn't say anything. We're all watching one another now. Isn't that what you wanted?" He walked toward her, not menacing, but with the gravity of quiet certainty. "You do not strike me as a woman easily frightened." "I'm not. And yet your hand," he said gently, "trembles when you touch the lamp." She pulled her fingers back instinctively. "Fear," Poirot said, "can disguise itself as disdain, but never completely. What is it that you dread, madam? The loss of standing? The exposure of a lie long buried?" Cecilia turned to the window, her reflection pale in the glass. "She wasn't wrong, you know, about what she guessed. Then why not stop her? She was clever, but not careful." Poirot didn't respond. Instead, he retrieved from the side table a folded linen napkin, one of the three found in the music room. "You see, madam," he said softly, "only one of the three napkins was folded in this fashion. You are the only one in the house who folds like this. Your tray from tea yesterday bore the same mark." Cecilia froze. She had tea with someone just before she died. Poirot continued, "Someone who folded their napkin, though she never used one." "That napkin, madam, was yours?" Cecilia turned, expression unreadable. "What are you saying?" "I am saying only that you were there. I brought the tea," she said quickly. "That's all. She asked for it. Said she wasn't feeling well." Poirot gave a small nod. And what did you talk about? Nothing. She barely said 2 words. Not even about the parcel she had posted, the one to Chelsea? Cecilia's mouth tightened. I knew nothing about a parcel. Poirot's gaze remained still. Then someone has lied to you. Or you have lied to me. He let the silence stretch, watching her shift slightly beneath its weight. As she left, Poirot sat again at the writing desk and reviewed his notes. Already the emotional threads were unraveling. Rupert's panic, Henry's aggression, Cecilia's carefully veiled fear. Someone had brought tea. Someone had folded the napkin. Someone had planted a letter in Fenella's book. And someone, perhaps not the same, had stolen the parcel she believed would protect her. Poirot tapped his pen against the edge of the notebook and muttered, "The lies are beginning to contradict one another. And that, mon cher, is where truth begins to breathe." Chapter 8. A secondary mystery train arrived unannounced that evening, thin, steady, and persistent. It tapped against the window panes like a metronome, setting the tempo for a night that would not rest easy. Poirot, ever sensitive to atmosphere, felt it settle into the bones of Ravenscroft Manor as if it were marking a new act in an unfinished play. At precisely 7 o'clock, a scream rang out from the west wing. It was not theatrical, no shrill hysteria or wailing. It was short, shocked, contained, and very real. Poirot was already halfway down the hall when Mrs. Marsh flung open the drawing-room doors. Her face ashen. In the study, she gasped, "The ledger! Someone's been in it." They gathered quickly: Henry, Cecilia, Rupert, Isabel, even Inspector Larch, who had returned for supper and was nursing a tepid bowl of stew. Poirot led them into the late Lord Ravenscroft's study, where the great oak desk stood like an altar beneath the painted stare of ancestral portraits. The drawer was open, unlocked. Inside, the estate's ledger lay on its spine, pages splayed unnaturally, several entries inked over. Poirot knelt beside it. "Do not touch anything." Mrs. Marsh wrung her hands. "I dust this room every day. That drawer is always locked. Only Mr. Henry has the key." Henry stepped forward slowly, eyes narrowed. "It wasn't me, and yet the ink is fresh," Poirot said quietly. "Someone tried to alter the account book." Larch moved beside him, frowning. "Do we know what was changed?" Poirot nodded toward a column near the back of the ledger. "Here, a record of a trust, meant for Miss Fenella, though it was never formally claimed. But now the name has been obscured, replaced with a beneficiary's code." He looked up. Someone attempted to erase Fenella, not only from the manor but from its records. Henry's face tightened. "Are you saying she was entitled to something?" Poirot said nothing at first. He rose and crossed to the hearth, where a faint heat still glowed. Kneeling, he drew out a charred corner of parchment. "There was something else," he said. "Something burned here not an hour ago." Larch picked up the tongs and extracted a second fragment. The corner of an envelope, the address nearly intact. "Chelsea Convent, London." Poirot's voice was soft. "The letter she meant to post. Or perhaps a duplicate." Destroyed in haste, Cecilia stepped backward, visibly shaken. "So someone didn't just kill her. They're trying to erase every trace of her. A new crime," Poirot murmured, "but one that began before the murder. This is not panic. It is strategy. A systematic attempt to reshape the narrative of her life." Isabel, pale and trembling, whispered, "She knew someone would do this. That's why she sent the parcel." Poirot turned to her gently. "Mademoiselle, you said Fenella warned you never to trust the person whose door was always unlocked." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Have you since tried that door?" A pause, then, very quietly, "Yes, this morning." Cecilia's, all heads turned. Cecilia's mouth opened, then closed again. "I leave it unlocked out of habit. The latch sticks. No one else's latch sticks," Poirot replied. "I have nothing to hide. And yet," he said gently, "you never denied it." Larch stepped forward. "This could be obstruction. If she had that parcel," Poirot lifted a hand. "Let us not leap. But we must consider this. Miss Fenella suspected someone in this house, was trying to manipulate the records. Her instincts were correct." He turned to the desk once more and lifted a second sheet buried beneath the ledger. It was an older estate document, dated for years prior. A will revision. The signature smudged, the ink brown with time. Cecilia's voice, tight with something between panic and rage, cut through the air. She wasn't family. She was adopted. What did she expect inheritance? Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Adoption is not exclusion, madam. In fact, it may signify greater intention." He laid the document flat on the table. "This will revision was never filed, but it names Miss Fenella as the executor of a private bequest jewels artworks and several shares in a London trust." Henry exhaled. "No one ever told me." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "because someone ensured you never saw it." He looked slowly from face to face. "That someone has now altered the ledger, burned the final envelope, and if my suspicions are correct, was behind the disappearance of the notebooks that once sat in Fenella's drawer." There was a silence that felt like held breath. Rupert whispered, "Then she wasn't just curious. She knew. She always knew," Isabel said, near tears. But no one listened. Poirot folded the document and handed it to Larch. "This should be secured. What remains of it is enough to prove motive." He turned and addressed the room. "This crime, it did not end with her death. It continues. Whoever killed her is still trying to erase what she saw. But as you can see, even ash leaves its outline." As the household dispersed, Cecilia paused beside the study door, one hand on the frame. "You believe it was me," she said quietly. "I believe," Poirot replied without looking at her, "that someone feared Fenella's legacy more than her questions. And fear, madam, makes a most inelegant companion." He waited until her footsteps faded, then turned back to the fireplace and stared into the smoldering gray. The rain continued, soft, relentless, and somewhere within that quiet, the past tried once more to disappear. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The next morning broke with a brittle stillness, as though the manor itself had grown cautious. No one spoke over breakfast. Even the cutlery seemed to move more quietly, as if wary of betrayal. Poirot sipped his coffee without cream, his gaze flitting between the tired faces at the table, observing who avoided whom, whose eyes darted to the hallway at the sound of a creak, who now sat farther apart than they had before. The night's discovery, the tampered ledger, the half-burnt will, the destroyed envelope had sent invisible fractures through the household. Poirot could feel it in the tension beneath every word, and yet something still eluded him. He retreated once more to the study, requesting the original Ravencroft estate documents from Mrs. Marsh, who produced them reluctantly from a locked cabinet in the attic corridor. They smelled faintly of mold and parchment dust. Poirot pored over them for over an hour, cross-referencing dates, signatures, and annotations that bore only initials dotted 11 precisely. He was joined by Isabel, summoned at his request. She entered nervously, her cardigan buttoned crookedly, clutching a notebook whose corners were frayed by habitual handling. "You said you helped Miss Fenella with her reading." "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, motioning for her to sit. "Did she ever show you these documents? Ask you to look at any names?" She hesitated. "Once, I didn't understand most of it, but she had a list, with initials, and dates." "Did she say what they meant?" "She said they were trails, that some money from the trust wasn't staying in the family, that it was being moved, quietly, disguised as something else." Poirot's brows lifted. "Embezzlement? I don't know that word, but she said someone was drawing from it like a well that never ran dry." "And did she tell you who?" Isobel's fingers tightened around the notebook. "No, but she did say she thought the money was being funneled through someone else's name, a name she didn't recognize at first." Poirot rose and paced slowly to the fireplace. "She was tracking it. Piece by piece, Isabel nodded. That's why she wrote everything down. Poirot turned. This notebook, may I? She handed it to him slowly, as if passing over something sacred. Inside, in Fenella's sharp slant, were notes, dates, sums, cryptic shorthand notations like CA, July transfer gives Ashcroft account, and vault mention duplicate ledger. But it was the page at the center that arrested his attention. There, underlined 3 times, were the words, check Ambrose's final codicil. Name discrepancy, codicil, Poirot murmured. A legal amendment, likely to the original will. He flipped quickly back through the estate records and found it signed 2 months before Lord Ambrose's death. A supplemental clause naming a guardian of trust interests in the event of familial dispute. The name, Edmund Vale. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Rupert Vale. He sat back, fingers pressed together, deep in thought. Mademoiselle Isabel, did you ever meet Rupert's father? She shook her head. No, but Fenella asked Mr. Rupert about him once. He said they weren't close. Poirot stood. This name, Edmund Vale, he is not mentioned in the final will, only in this codicil. And yet he was given power of discretion over several of the smaller trusts, precisely the ones Fenella was investigating. Isabel looked confused. But Rupert teaches music. Poirot said softly, and perhaps unknowingly benefits from an inheritance filtered through shell names and forgotten amendments. He walked to the window, where the storm had left streaks across the glass. And so we see it, a web not of hatred, but of quiet profit. A second ledger, a sealed drawer, the comb beneath the settee, each a signal of design. He paused, then turned. But there is more. Later that afternoon, Poirot invited Inspector Larch to join him in the library. He laid out the estate records on the desk, then added to them a pair of telegram receipts. Fenella had kept tucked into the back of her notebook, one sent to a solicitor in London, and the other to the Chelsea convent, both dated a week before her death. She was trying to verify something, Poirot said, but she feared interception, so she duplicated her message. Larch frowned. And neither telegram ever received a reply? We have no evidence they did. But the convent address is significant, because she trusted them. Poirot nodded. Yes, but more than that. The convent housed her briefly before her adoption. It's likely her first legal identity, the name she used. Before she became Fenella Marsh is known only there. Larch's eyes widened. You think she wasn't born Fenella Marsh? I think, Poirot said carefully, that she discovered she had ties to the Ravencroft family long before her adoption. Ties that were erased, then rewritten. She was not merely an orphan taken in. She was a threat to the lineage's careful narrative. Larch leaned forward. Then this goes deeper than jealousy or blackmail. Indeed, Poirot said. This was about silencing a truth too entangled with privilege to be allowed the air. As the inspector departed, Poirot remained seated at the desk, staring once more at the codicil bearing the name Edmund Vale. His gaze drifted to the fire, where ash still clung faintly to the grate, and he said, so quietly no one heard, to hide a legacy. One must first erase the child who remembers it. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue that evening. Poirot walked alone through the upper gallery, where oil portraits of Ravencroft ancestors lined the corridor like sentries of silence. He moved slowly, almost reverently, fingertips grazing the varnished frames as though listening to each painted face whisper its own secret. He stopped before a narrow door at the end of the hallway, the door to Fenella's old room. He had not entered it until now. The chamber was still, undisturbed since the day of her death. A faint floral scent clung to the edges of the room, and a single lamp burned low on the writing desk. Someone, perhaps Mrs. Marsh, had tidied the space, but not thoroughly. Beneath that veneer of order, Poirot could feel it, the unfinished business of a young woman who had been too close to the truth. He stepped to the desk, where Fenella's blotter remained in place. Beside it lay a fountain pen, a dried inkpot, and a scrap of paper on which she had practiced a signature. Not hers. Poirot narrowed his eyes. He lifted the paper gently. The same initials from her notebook. The loops in the capital. A matched the flourish from the codicil amendment in the will Cecilia Ambrose's hand, imitated, studied, practiced. Why? He whispered. Because Fenella suspected the document had been falsified. Because she thought Cecilia had amended it either with consent or without. But Poirot did not speak it aloud. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the wardrobe. He opened its tall doors and ran his hand along the back panel. It was smooth but thinner than the surrounding wood. He pressed gently. A hollow tap. Poirot smiled. Ah, and now we find what has not yet been found. With the tip of his cane, he pried the panel forward, revealing a narrow gap between the back wall and the wardrobe's rear. Inside, wrapped in linen and twine, sat a bundle of notebooks. Fenella single quotes S. He exhaled softly, then carried them to the desk, laying each one out with the care of a priest at communion. The entries were dense observations, dates, calculations, but in the final notebook, on the last page, she had written a single sentence underlined in red. If I disappear, the key is in the comb. Poirot's eyes widened. The comb, the one found beneath the settee in the music room, the one with a broken tooth and a single strand of silver hair. He fetched it from the case Larch had sealed in the drawing room. Under the light of the desk lamp, Poirot examined it again, but this time with a jeweler's loupe he pulled from his waistcoat. And there it was, a tiny compartment, no wider than a postage stamp, hidden beneath the hinge of the comb's handle, barely visible, designed to go unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. With a careful press, the latch clicked open. Inside was a folded strip of paper, almost tissue thin. Poirot unfolded it. It was a photocopy, a section of the Ravencroft Trust records, specifically the line item naming the original beneficiary of the London account now marked transferred, and beside it, handwritten in Fenella's script, they changed it from F for Ashcroft to E. Vale, months before Ambrose died. Cecilia knew. She approved it. Poirot let out a slow breath. Ashcroft, not Marsh, Ashcroft, her birth name. The name no one had spoken. So Fenella had not simply discovered a missing inheritance. She had uncovered proof of a calculated erasure and amendment to transfer her own entitlement to someone else. Edmund Vale, Rupert's father, likely already dead, the perfect vessel for quiet theft. And Cecilia had known, perhaps even orchestrated it. He returned the comb's contents to the envelope, resealed the notebooks, and hid them once more, not because he wished to keep the truth from Larch, but because this truth, like poison, had to be administered with timing and precision. Downstairs, laughter rang out in the drawing room, hollow, performative. Cecilia, perhaps, or Henry, or both. Poirot stepped into the hallway and paused before the portrait of Lord Ambrose Ravencroft. The man's face was stony, his gaze fixed on some invisible horizon, his painted hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial sword. "How many secrets did you allow to grow beneath your roof, monsieur?" Poirot asked the oil and canvas. "And who did you trust to bury them?" He walked back to his chamber, mind alight. He now had what he needed, the truth behind Fenella's birthright, the forged transfer, the hidden notebooks, the coded message in the comb. But he did not yet have the killer, because someone had panicked. Someone had killed her to stop this discovery from surfacing. And yet, the copy still existed, in a place none had thought to search. Not a safe, not a drawer, a hair comb. It was not rage that had killed Fenella Marsh. It was calculation. And Hercule Poirot now knew whose calculations were beginning to unravel. Chapter 11. Tensions riseth. Next morning's sun offered no warmth. It slid over the hills in dull smears, casting Ravencroft Manor in a pale, almost sickly light. The tension that had been slowly gathering now settled like fog in the drawing room corners, in the corners of everyone's voices, and in the sideways glances that grew sharper with every passing hour. Poirot did not reveal what he had found in the comb. Not yet. He watched instead. And as he watched, something remarkable happened. The suspects turned on each other. It began with Henry. "I want to know what Cecilia was doing in the study last night," he said aloud over breakfast, pushing his plate forward untouched. "She claims she was looking for old letters. At 2 in the morning?" Cecilia, dressed impeccably in navy silk, didn't flinch. "What I do in my own home is none of your business. Your home," Henry said coldly. "You were married into this family for 5 years. I've lived here since childhood." She folded her napkin with sharp precision. "And did your father ever mention to you that he considered selling your share of the land to pay his debts?" Henry paled. "That's a lie," Poirot interjected gently. "It is curious, is it not, how easily we retreat into accusation when the air becomes thick with questions." Rupert Vale, seated by the window, finally spoke. "It wasn't a stranger. We all know that now. Someone we trusted did this, and you'd know all about betrayal, wouldn't you?" Cecilia said, her voice like cracked porcelain. "Your father's name appears in half the trust documents that have mysteriously vanished." Rupert stood abruptly. "You think I wanted any part in that mess? I don't even understand half the papers Fenella found." Poirot observed quietly, noting who raised their voice, who grew still, and who watched the others with too much intensity. Isabel, curled in the corner with her tea, flinched with every exchange. The room had turned. The veneer of civility had peeled back, and underneath it lay a rich soil of blame and fear. Mrs. Marsh appeared at the door, visibly tense. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "the gardeners just brought this in. Found it buried under the ivy beside the west wall." She handed him a small tin box, rusted at the edges. Inside was a folded note and a pocket key. Poirot opened the note and read it silently. Then he slipped both into his coat pocket and turned to the others. "I think," he said quietly, "it is time we speak plainly." He moved to the fireplace and stood with his back to it, surveying them. Mademoiselle Fenella, he began, was not merely curious. She had learned that her very identity, her origin, had been manipulated, that her rightful place in the Ravencroft legacy had been stolen from her by means of legal sleight of hand and administrative delay. She did not confront this loudly. She investigated quietly. But someone noticed. He walked slowly across the room, tapping a gloved finger against his chin. Someone realized that she had uncovered not only financial irregularities, but a forgery, a name changed, a codicil amended, and most dangerously, that she had begun to make copies of what she found. Henry folded his arms. "You're speaking in riddles." "No, monsieur." "In caution." "Because this," he withdrew the note from his coat and unfolded it. "This was not meant to be found." He handed it to Inspector Larch, who read aloud, "If anything happens to me, the ledgers in the east attic contain duplicates. Use the pocket key. Tell Isabel." A stunned silence followed. Cecilia turned, ice in her voice. "How did the gardener find that?" "Buried shallowly," Poirot said. "Meant to be recovered." "But it never was." Rupert's voice trembled. "So she knew. She knew someone wanted to silence her." Poirot nodded. "She feared being disbelieved, so she left a trail." He paused and turned to Isabel. "You were meant to find this, mademoiselle. She trusted you to speak for her when she could not." Isabel clutched her tea tighter. "I would have. If I'd known." Poirot addressed the room again. "You have begun to suspect one another. But suspicion, like smoke, does not always come from fire. It can be thrown, directed, manufactured." He glanced at Cecilia. "You said Fenella brought her suspicions on herself." "I did," Cecilia replied stiffly. "And yet, she was not the one falsifying documents, was she?" Cecilia's eyes flicked to the others, But she said nothing. Poirot turned to Henry. You feared exposure of your financial dealings, but you did not kill her. Henry looked up, surprised. No, Poirot said. Your pride would not permit so crude a solution. You intended to fight her in court, not in silence. He turned finally to Rupert, whose face had gone pale. You, Monsieur Vale, did not even know your father's name appeared in those records. But someone did. Someone who sought to protect the family name. Yes, but more importantly, their own position, their future. Poirot stepped back from the hearth. I now know who killed Fenella Marsh. But before I say it, I must wait. Wait for what? Rupert asked. Poirot's eyes glittered. For the final piece. It is already in motion. As the others fell into uneasy silence, Poirot walked slowly out of the room, leaving behind only the echo of tension and the knowledge that the web was nearly done spinning. One more lie, one more step, and the spider would expose itself. Chapter 12. The confrontation that evening. The manor was unusually quiet, that no music echoed from the west wing. No footsteps creaked up the main stairs. Even the ticking of the long case clock in the corridor felt subdued, as though time itself had slowed to hold its breath. Poirot waited in the library. The fire had been stoked low, the curtains drawn, the atmosphere made small and close. He sat in the armchair where Lord Ambrose had once read accounts of land sales and family trusts. His legs crossed delicately, a slip of parchment between two fingers, the note from the garden tin. The key to the attic had already been delivered to Inspector Larch, who now occupied himself with a full examination of the east attic ledgers. But Poirot was not with Larch, not yet. He was waiting for the final crack in the masked dot at 8:30. It arrived. The door creaked open and Cecilia Ambrose entered without knocking, her silhouette framed by lamplight. She wore no jewelry tonight, no silk, only a dark wool cardigan and gloves. I was told you wished to speak with me, she said evenly. I did not send for you, Poirot replied, not rising. But I suspected you might come. She walked to the hearth, careful and controlled. Then let's speak plainly, Trisbine, Poirot said softly. I know what was in the envelope Fenella attempted to send to the convent. I know what was in the ledgers she copied. I know what she uncovered about the bequest and how it tied to you. Cecilia said nothing. Her fingers, clad in leather, tightened slightly on the back of the armchair across from him. You were her confidant once, Poirot went on, in a superficial way. She admired you, I think, until she understood you were not the woman she imagined. Don't moralize, monsieur, Cecilia said flatly. You're here to find a killer, not pass judgment. Poirot tilted his head. Is that what you think I do? Judge, none, I observe. And what I observe, madam, is a woman who knew the structure of the Ravencroft estate better than anyone, better, even, than the heirs. She didn't speak. You assisted Lord Ambrose in amending his will. You had access to the ledgers. You knew the codicils, the trustees, the charitable fronts, those quiet shadows through which one could redirect assets without attracting suspicion. You knew precisely how to erase a name without drawing a line through it. Cecilia's gaze fixed on the fire. Fenella found the comb. Poirot continued, voice low. She found the signature forged in your hand. She found the parcel that proved her inheritance had been stolen. And you knew, once she confronted the others, that everything would unravel. She looked up at him then, sharply. I didn't strangle her. No, Poirot said gently. You didn't. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, only a moment, her composure faltered. She asked to meet you in the music room, Poirot said, watching her. You brought the tea. You folded the napkin in that habitual, triangular way. And then you left. She said she needed a moment to herself, Cecilia murmured. Yes, Poirot said. She needed a moment to make a decision whether to reveal what she had found, or to wait until the parcel reached safety. He leaned forward. But someone else followed after you left. Someone who had been listening from the corridor. Someone who did not knock. Someone who wore gloves. Cecilia's breath caught. You mean? Poirot stood slowly. Madam, I do not believe you killed her, but you enabled it. You planted the forged signature. You filed the false transfer. You panicked when you realized she had seen it all, and then you tried to clean the crime. You did not commit. Her face turned pale. I thought I was protecting the estate, the name, the structure that held it all together. And in doing so, Poirot said, you broke the one thing that mattered, the truth. They stood in silence, firelight flickering between them. Then Cecilia said, barely above a whisper, you know who did it, don't you? Poirot nodded. I do. She blinked. Rupert. No. She hesitated. Then I will reveal it tomorrow, Poirot said calmly. In front of them all. You will be present. You may speak if you wish, or not. But I advise you, madam, prepare your conscience. For what comes next will not preserve reputation. Her mouth trembled slightly, and she turned away, pressing a gloved hand to the mantel as though the carved wood might steady her. I only ever wanted what was promised, she murmured. And so did Fenella, Poirot said quietly. But her promise was taken, not by hatred, not even by greed, but by fear. He walked past her to the door, pausing only once to say, fear, madam, may protect us in the moment, but it makes cowards of us in the end. And with that, he departed. In the silence he left behind, Cecilia Ambrose stood alone by the fire, her gloves smudged with ash, her past smoldering quietly behind her eyes. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape just before dawn. The manor stirred again, not with screams this time, but with footsteps. Quiet, deliberate, almost graceful. They moved through the east wing, past portraits and shuttered rooms, avoiding floorboards that creaked, avoiding the watchful eyes of staff already beginning to rise. Poirot, awake in his chamber with the habit of a man who had learned to sleep lightly in dangerous houses, was already dressed. He stood at the corner of the stairwell, completely still, his sharp eyes following the shadow descending in haste. Cecilia. She moved with purpose, but not panic-clad in a dark traveling coat, her hair pinned with careful speed. In one hand, she carried a valise. In the other, a stack of folded papers. Poirot could guess what they were: copies, perhaps originals, perhaps even the ledgers she had retrieved before Larch could catalog them. She reached the front door and paused only briefly to pull on her gloves. The sun had not yet risen. A car waited just beyond the trees, engine quietly rumbling. Poirot stepped forward. You chose poorly, madam, he said gently. It is always the second attempt that gives the game away. She froze. Why not run before? He continued. When you knew the letter had been found, when you realized the comb had spoken. Because, I suspect, you thought I would name someone else, that you would be safe. She turned slowly to face him. Her voice, when it came, was low. You said I didn't kill her. I believe that, Poirot replied. But you knew who did. And worse, afterward, you protected them. You tampered with the study drawer. You destroyed the second envelope. She clutched her case closer. I didn't want the name ruined. It was never about the money, no, Poirot said. It was about control. You feared what would happen if Fenella's version of the truth became the official one. If she was revealed to be a legitimate heir. If the Ravencroft legacy shifted toward her line. She exhaled shakily. She would have torn it all down. She would have corrected a wrong, Poirot replied. But what has been done in secret always fears the light. He descended the stairs, slowly. She covered for you, you know, he said. In her notes, she never once accused you directly. She suspected. She was disappointed. But she still believed you could be persuaded to do the right thing. Cecilia looked away, blinking too quickly. She told me she'd delay the reveal. If I gave her the name, and you did not, I couldn't I was too foreign. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But then you learned she'd already written to the convent, sent the comb, hidden her notebooks. Suddenly your silence was no longer protective, it became incriminating. So you took matters into your own hands. She said nothing. You did not kill her, Poirot repeated. But you tried to erase the path she left behind. And now this, running, that is the act of someone who fears being made a liar under oath. He stepped to the front door and opened it, allowing the cool wind of early morning to rush in outside. Inspector Larch was waiting beside the hedgerow, arms folded. Two constables flanked him. Cecilia stiffened. You planned for this, she said bitterly. We. Poirot replied. Because I knew the moment I said I would wait that you would not. You prefer to move first. She did not resist as the constables approached, but she turned to Poirot one last time. It wasn't me, she said. Not with her. I swear it, he nodded. And yet you shared in the death by aiding the silence. She hesitated, then handed him the valise. Don't let him get away with it, she said quietly. Who? Poirot asked, though he did not need to. But she didn't answer. She was already walking to the car, flanked by Law. Poirot stood alone now in the doorway of Ravencroft Manor, the valise warm in his hand. He opened it and found, as expected, the missing notebook pages, several duplicates of trust documents, and one photograph, a grainy, black and white image of Fenella as a child smiling shyly at the edge of the convent garden, her hand held by a tall man with a violin case, Rupert Vale. He studied the man's face, younger, uncertain, but undeniably Rupert. Not his father. The implication struck deep. Poirot returned to the drawing room and placed the photograph beside the comb on the table. It was time. The circle would be gathered again, and this time, the murderer would no longer be a shadow among them. Because now, with Cecilia gone, only the guilty remained. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The photograph rested in silence on the drawing room table, its edges curled slightly with age. The girl Fenella stood stiffly, one foot pointed inward, her face shy and radiant. But it was the man beside her who held Poirot's attention, a violin case in one hand, a gentle lean toward the child, the smile hesitant, the resemblance undeniable. Not Edmund Vale, Rupert Vale. It struck like a whisper turning into thunder. She wasn't just investigating the trust. She was investigating him. Poirot turned toward the window, the morning light now strong and unforgiving as it spilled across the library carpet. 1,000 moments replayed themselves. Rupert's trembling voice, his panic when accused, his insistence that he knew nothing of the financial records. Yet he had also been quiet when others fought. Too quiet, watching, listening, calculating. And now this. He summoned Inspector Larch. The photograph, Poirot said, gesturing to the table. Take a good look. Larch frowned, leaning in. Is that Vale? Not his father. Him. That photo was taken more than 20 years ago. At Chelsea Convent. Larch's eyes narrowed. But he said he had no connection to the place. That he barely remembered his childhood. Indeed, Poirot said. A lie. Larch looked up sharply. Are you saying she and Rupert were related? No, Poirot said softly. Something stranger. Something far more delicate. He paced once around the fireplace. Fenella was placed in the convent as a child under the name Ashcroft, likely her mother's name. She was later adopted by Lord Ravencroft. The circumstances were never clearly discussed. But look at the photograph. It is not that of a man meeting a stranger's child. It is a boy, perhaps 15, already holding responsibility and recognition. Larch blinked. Are you saying she was his? No, Poirot said again. But I believe she was his half-sister. Larch stared. Good God. Poirot held up a finger. Now consider this. Rupert claimed to know nothing about the family finances. Yet his father Edmund Vale was listed as a beneficiary, a trustee, and a legal guardian of the trust. Why? Because Lord Ambrose used the Vale name to shield his maneuverings, and Rupert never questioned that, or pretended not to, Poirot said, until Fenella came to close. The door creaked open behind them. Rupert Vale stood there, hands trembling, eyes locked on the photograph. "I saw the car take Cecilia," he said quietly. "I suppose she told you everything." "She told me only what I already knew," Poirot replied without looking away. "The rest you will now provide." Rupert stepped forward slowly, gaze fixed to the image of the girl. "I didn't mean for her to die," he said. Poirot turned. "And yet you made it so." She wasn't supposed to find that picture," Rupert muttered. "Or the ledgers. She said she wanted to meet me alone. I thought she was bluffing, but she wasn't." Rupert closed his eyes. "She said she knew everything, that I was the real link, that my father was just a front, that I had inherited control through his name, and didn't even realize it. But I did realize it." Poirot waited. "She said she'd go to the papers, that the Ravencroft estate had buried too many things, that she had proof, and she did. I could see it in her eyes." Rupert lowered his voice. "I didn't plan it. I swear to you. When she turned away, I grabbed her wrist. I told her she couldn't send the parcel. She laughed at me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "So you reached for her scarf." Rupert's voice was barely audible now. "I meant to stop her. Just stop her. But I pulled." He sank into the chair as though his knees had given way. "I thought when she fell it was over. But it was worse. She wasn't moving. She was already gone." Larch stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you confess then?" Rupert's laugh was small and broken. "Because of what would come out. That I'd been taking funds I didn't even know I had access to. That I'd signed Cecilia's name to the codicil when I was barely 20. She told me too. She said it was just a formality. And the parcel?" Poirot asked. "I stole it from her desk. Burned the copy. I didn't find the comb until it was too late." Poirot folded his arms. "And the photograph? I forgot it even existed," Rupert whispered. "But she hadn't. She kept it. She'd always suspected." Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur Vale, what you did was not born of cruelty, but of cowardice. You feared what she represented, a challenge to your inherited privilege. And so, in a moment of panic, you ended her life." Rupert said nothing. Poirot looked to Larch. "It is time." The inspector nodded slowly, then stepped outside to summon his constables. Poirot turned back once more, gazing down at the photograph. Two children, one who asked too many questions, and one who answered them too late. The final piece had fallen into place. The truth, at last, stood upright. Chapter 15. The final gathering be midday. The drawing room had been arranged with subtle gravity. The chairs were drawn in a wide semicircle before the hearth. The curtains had been opened fully for the first time in days, allowing the wan autumn sun to flood the space in solemn light. It was a room poised for confession. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, hands clasped neatly in front of him. The photograph of Fenella and Rupert lay on a side table beneath a glass cloakie. Now silent witness to all that had unfolded, he had requested that everyone still residing at Ravencroft Manor gather. Henry arrived first, stiff and defensive, followed by Isabel, who looked pale but composed. Rupert was brought in last, seated between two constables, his expression unreadable. Even Mrs. Marsh, uninvited but not unwelcomed, hovered at the doorway, twisting her wedding ring absently as she listened. Poirot waited until the hush thickened like velvet, then began. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, voice steady, "we have gathered today not in anger, but in clarity. A life was taken, Miss Fenella Marsh, and the truth of that loss has floated like mist above this house, moving room to room, clinging to walls, brushing against your shoulders even as you denied its weight." He paused, letting the silence deepen before stepping closer. "This crime was never about greed alone. It was about lineage, about the fear of what blood reveals when paper and name no longer conceal it. He gestured toward the photograph. Miss Fenella, born Ashcroft, was brought into the Ravencroft household under the guise of charity. But it was not merely a gesture of benevolence. It was reparation. Lord Ambrose had fathered a child in secret, and that child Fenella was not merely a ward of the estate. She was its heir. Gasps escaped from Isabel and Henry. Poirot continued, but there were complications, legal, social, emotional, and so her name was changed, her identity shrouded. The estate, her rightful inheritance, was redirected, and one of those redirections led through a name, Edmund Vale. He turned to Rupert. Your father was the face, but you, monsieur, were the key. As a young man, you were encouraged to sign, to approve, to allow without full comprehension. And when Fenella uncovered this, it frightened you. Because suddenly, the wealth and status you thought accidental were not. Rupert didn't look up. You claimed ignorance, Poirot said. But then she confronted you, and your panic did what guilt alone would not. It silenced her. Rupert's voice cracked. I didn't plan to hurt her. Poirot did not soften. You did. You grabbed her scarf. You pulled. She fell. And in that moment, whether you meant to or not, you extinguished a life. He turned to the others. Cecilia, too, played a role in forging signatures, in preserving the deception, in destroying evidence after the fact. But she did not commit the act. She merely tried to delay its consequence. Henry stood abruptly. And what of me? Are you here to accuse the whole family? No, Poirot said calmly. You, monsieur, were arrogant, dismissive, but not complicit. You feared Fenella for her cleverness, not her claims. You are guilty of indifference, perhaps. Not murder. Henry sat again. Slowly, Poirot looked to Isabel, who blinked rapidly as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to give you something, he said softly. A name, a legacy, a truth. She was the only one who ever saw me, Isabel whispered. Even when I didn't know who I was. Poirot stepped back, hands folding gently behind him. This house has been ruled by silence, he said. Silence in its ledgers, silence in its portraits, silence in its blood. But silence does not erase truth. It only delays it. He turned to Inspector Larch and gave a single nod. Rupert Vale rose slowly. I'll sign a confession, he said, almost dreamlike. No, Poirot said. You will speak it first, and then you will answer to justice. Rupert opened his mouth as if to begin, then closed it again. He looked toward the photograph under glass, and the smallest flicker of grief passed over his face, perhaps not for Fenella, but for what had been lost between them before either had the words. He was led from the room quietly. Poirot remained by the fire. The storm had broken, but still, no one moved. Not yet. The spell of revelation had left behind not triumph, but something quieter, something heavier. It was the end of a silence, but not yet the end of sorrow. Chapter 16. The Revealator. That afternoon, the light softened through the trees outside Ravencroft Manor, casting long golden lines across the parquet floors. Inside, a hush lingered like the aftermath of a storm, stillness not from peace, but from exhaustion. The air had been cleared, but the house had not yet learned to breathe again. Poirot remained in the drawing room. The fire had burned low, crackling gently as shadows leaned against the walls. Inspector Larch had returned to the village with Rupert Vale in custody. Mrs. Marsh, after discreetly weeping in the hallway, had excused herself to prepare supper. Only Isabel remained with Poirot now, sitting on the edge of a high-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap like an uncertain schoolgirl awaiting instruction. Poirot's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and precise. Do you know why I asked you to stay, mademoiselle? She shook her head. I suppose, because I was closest to her. That is part of it, but also because you, unlike the others, were not pretending. You did not hide what you saw. You simply did not know how to name it. Isabel looked down. She trusted me. I should have done more. Poirot moved toward her, his step unhurried. No, mademoiselle. It was not your task to unmask what she could not. It was hers, and she did. She left the truth not in a letter, nor a will, but in the smallest gestures. A photograph, a comb, a napkin. And in choosing you, Isabel blinked. Me? She believed you would remain clear, that when others lied out of shame, or fear, you would still remember what was done. Poirot sat opposite her. May I tell you something I have never said aloud, mademoiselle? She looked startled, then nodded. I do not believe in evil as a force, he said. Not in the theatrical way it is often described. But I do believe in cowardice, in self-deception, in what people will do not because they hate, but because they cannot bear to lose what they think they deserve. Isabel nodded slowly. That's what happened to Rupert, isn't it? Oui, Poirot said. He had spent his life believing himself unimportant. Then suddenly, he realized he was not only part of the machine but at its center. And someone else, a half-sister with clearer eyes and fewer illusions, was about to dismantle it. And Cecilia? She, too, was complicit. But hers was a more elegant form of fear. She feared the collapse of reputation, of structure. She thought the truth could be postponed, like an unpleasant guest kept waiting in the cold. But truth does not wait. He stood and moved to the window. This morning, I walked the garden paths. I noticed a tree near the far west wall, a cypress. Do you know it? Isabel nodded. Fenella liked it. She used to sit beneath it and write. There is something poetic about it, Poirot said. The cypress does not bloom. It holds its green through all seasons, tall and narrow, like a quiet sentinel. She must have found comfort in it. There was silence between them, a soft kind of silence. Poirot turned. There is something else I must show you. From the inner pocket of his coat, he withdrew a small envelope and placed it gently into her hands. What is it? She left it with me, in case the truth came too late. Isabel opened the flap carefully and withdrew a folded sheet of notepaper in Fenella's hand. For Isabel, it read, in case I am not here to say it, you are not invisible. You are not a shadow. You are worth more than your silence. Remember that when they try to make you forget. Isobel's eyes filled instantly. Her lips trembled, but she did not speak. Poirot placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. She saw what the rest of them refused to. That is why she trusted you. Isabel looked up, voice thin. What will happen to the estate now? There will be hearings, Poirot said, and paperwork, much of it ugly. But her claim, her inheritance, will be recognized. Her name will no longer be a footnote, and the truth, mademoiselle, will no longer be hidden in drawers. She held the note to her chest, her shoulders quaking in silence. Outside, the wind had softened. The cypress trees no longer swayed, but stood in gentle stillness, as if listening. Poirot, his task nearly complete, allowed himself one final glance toward the fading light. He did not smile, not quite, but a quiet calm passed across his features. Justice had arrived not with triumph, but with gentleness, like the truth itself, quiet, clear, and unstoppable. Chapter 17. Outcome and justice. By the time the magistrate's letter arrived at Ravencroft Manor, 3 days later, the house had grown quieter, not from fear, but from the solemn hush of reckoning. Cecilia Ambrose remained under house arrest pending formal charges of document forgery and obstruction. Rupert Vale had been transferred to the holding cells in Salisbury, awaiting arraignment for manslaughter, and the Ravencroft estate, for the first time in decades, stood still, not with entitlement, but with consequence. Poirot stood in the main hall reading the letter's contents with quiet gravity. The ruling was swift. The court had validated the codicil as tampered, the ledgers as doctored, and Fenella's original inheritance backed by her convent documentation and testimony from the London solicitor to be legally sound. Her Name was restored in ink. The Ashcroft Trust would pass to her designated heir. Isabel. He tucked the letter into its envelope and turned to find Henry descending the stairs. "You've stayed longer than expected," Henry said, voice dry yet tempered. "Some might even say you've grown fond of this place." Poirot smiled faintly. "A detective grows fond of truth, monsieur, not of rooms with heavy drapes and names that echo louder than the people who bear them." Henry gave a small nod, as if accepting a judgment already rendered. "I suppose I was never truly part of the worst of it," he said, "and yet I can't help feeling the floor was rotten beneath my feet the entire time." "You benefited from it," Poirot said gently, "even if you did not build it." Henry looked away. "And Isabel? What happens to her now?" "She inherits a portion," Poirot replied, "not out of kindness, but of right. A portion Fenella reserved for her, should the court validate her findings. A contingency clause, you might say." Henry's eyebrows rose. "She anticipated all this?" "She anticipated resistance," Poirot said, "and prepared for silence. But also, she prepared for victory." Henry gave a quiet exhale. "She was clever, more than I gave her credit for." Poirot gave a slight nod and turned away, leaving Henry alone on the staircase, still tall, still proud, but at last facing a history that no longer bowed before his name. Later that afternoon, Poirot met Isabel in the conservatory. The glass ceiling shone with sunlight, dappling the marble floor with leafy shadows. She was tending to a cluster of orchids, their blooms deep violet and trembling faintly in the breeze. "They were hers," she said, without turning. She said they only bloomed when no one was watching. Poirot smiled softly. "I believe that may be true of many things, mademoiselle." She rose and brushed soil from her hands. "It doesn't feel like I won anything. I keep waiting for it to feel different. Justice," Poirot said, "is not always loud. It is not triumph nor vengeance. It is the stillness that returns when truth is known." "I miss her," Isabel said suddenly. "I do, too," Poirot replied. She looked at him with surprise. "You barely knew her." He tapped his temple gently. "None, but I know her mind. I see the logic she followed, the careful threads she pulled, the courage it took to confront a house built on unspoken rules. I recognize that kind of thinking." Isabel smiled then, briefly, and Poirot reached into his coat to hand her a final item, a simple envelope, sealed in pale wax. "From the solicitor," he said. "The final clause of Fenella's instructions. A personal letter. She addressed it to you." Isabel took it with both hands, her fingers trembling. "Will you stay?" she asked. "At least through the end of the week." Poirot shook his head kindly. "My work here is done, and I believe, mademoiselle, yours is only beginning." He turned and walked toward the door, but paused at the threshold. "One last thing," he said over his shoulder. "Do not let this house become what it was. Let it change. Let it breathe." She nodded slowly. He tipped his hat, then slipped into the hallway, his steps echoing quietly through the marble corridor. Outside, a black car waited beneath the bare-limbed trees. Mrs. Marsh stood beside it, coat fastened, face serene. "You found what you came for," she said softly. "I found what she left," Poirot replied. She nodded. "It will be strange, this place, without its secrets." "Strange," Poirot said, stepping into the car. "But perhaps for once honest." The engine purred to life. As the manor receded behind him, Poirot did not look back. He had seen enough. Ravencroft had been a house of silence, of layered lies and invisible wounds. But in the end, a young woman's voice written in notes and combs and quiet courage had broken through. Justice had not arrived with fire, but with clarity. And sometimes, he thought, that was more than enough. Chapter 18. The closing remark. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Hercule Poirot's flat in London. The envelope was of modest quality pale parchment, a little bent at the corners and addressed in a careful, unpracticed hand. It bore no seal, only a pressed sprig of dried lavender tucked beneath the flap. Poirot opened it slowly. Dear Monsieur Poirot, the manor is quieter now, in a good way. The windows have been opened. We've cleared the storage rooms, and I've started moving Fenella's things into what used to be the west bedroom. Not to replace her, but to keep her near. The Ravencroft name will be smaller now. I've declined the full estate, as you guessed I might. The trust is enough. The rest I've given to a preservation society. The house will become a place for others to learn. I think she would have liked that. The orchids still bloom. And the comb, yes, I've kept it. Not for the secret it held, but because it reminds me that no truth, however small, is ever truly hidden. Thank you for listening, for believing her, for seeing what the rest of them refuse to see, I hope. Wherever your little gray cells take you next, there are fewer shadows and fewer silences. Yours gratefully, Isabel Ashcroft. Poirot read it twice, then folded it neatly, slid it into the drawer of his escritoire, and closed it with a soft click. Outside, the city bustled. The rattle of carts, the call of newsboys, the whistle of a distant train. Inside, Poirot placed his teacup precisely on its saucer, leaned back, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. There had been a murder, yes, a tangle of motives, deceptions, and forgotten names, but at its heart had been a question of legacy, of who is remembered and who is permitted to be seen. And that, he thought, was the work that mattered most, not merely to catch the killer, but to ensure the victim did not vanish in death as she had nearly vanished in life. He glanced toward the fire, where shadows flickered gently over the mantelpiece. Justice, he said softly, is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about being remembered in the correct light. Then, rising with quiet grace, he straightened the crease in his trousers, adjusted his cuffs, and stepped into the afternoon sun. For though the case of the affair at Ravencroft Manor had ended, the world, like the truth, still waited to be observed.